This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former Representative Gene Arnold from Nash County, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Politics Watch, easy for me to say, yeah, John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, and political consultant Brad Crone. Well, this week's show should be interesting and informative. We begin by talking about the move by the State Board of Education to allow more students to pass end-of-grade reading tests. We explore why state government has so many IT problems, and we're going to take a look at the current climate of politics in North Carolina, particularly with Democrats. Let's get started. Concerned about how many third-grade students would not pass end-of-grade reading tests, the State Board of Education changed how the students are labeled, adding another achievement level that would allow some 12,000 students to have sufficient reading skills and promoted to the fourth grade. It would also relieve that many students from having to attend summer reading camps. Question one to John. Advocates for making this change say that the intent of the law wasn't well implemented and needs changing. You wrote a good column on this week. Explain to us what's going on here and what really took place.
Well, the easiest way to do that would be for me to simply read my 1,200-word column word for word right now. Would that be okay?
Second place?
It is sort of complicated, but essentially in 2012, the legislature, as part of a reform bill for education, included a provision called Read to Achieve. The idea was that third graders would have to pass, most of them would have to pass a test in reading in order to be promoted to the fourth grade. After a couple of tries, if they hadn't passed it, they would go to a summer reading camp and then get retested again. The intent was really to focus on that quarter to a third of students who were simply not reading anywhere close to grade level in third grade. And the argument that basically everybody agrees with is that if you don't get basic reading skills at the end of the third grade, you're not going to do well, not just in reading, but in all the other subjects. The problem is that North Carolina then, the next year in 2013, implemented a new set of tests tied to Common Core. The tests are actually much more rigorous, or at least more rigorously graded than the previous tests were, but no one really figured out exactly what it meant to pass the third grade reading test under these new standards. So you ended up with way more third graders designated
45%
that passed. That meant that most didn't.
Yeah.
And so they really didn't set this. It's understandable there was disagreement because the legislature was writing the standard before the new tests were available. They assumed that the Department of Public Instruction would adjust the standard to the new test. DPI said, hey, we've always used this level, we use this level. So it was a miscommunication that was resolved sort of by the State Board of Education adding another level in between to sort of fudge the difference. It's a complicated story, but essentially they should have focused and now will be focusing on those students who really need the most help.
Brad, you deal in public perceptions. How's the public going to see this?
It is all a bunch of baloney, and it's bureaucrat baloney. The intent of the law was to make sure that the third graders pass the test. If they don't, they get additional help to bring them up to grade level, and it's just a bureaucratic mess.
To John's point, though, Tom, the Common Core standards were more difficult than the ones that they had previously. And then they didn't do well in that. So then you come back with a defined test that's even more difficult. It's unfair. The kids who make good grades in other subjects but were slow readers were the problem.
Well, Chris, we got a he said, she said type situation going on here. Phil Berger and the senator saying June Atkinson just didn't implement this thing correctly, and she's saying the legislature, when they wrote this law, didn't properly spell out exactly what the... Can we make out who's right and who's wrong here, or is everybody right and everybody wrong?
No, I think that both sides didn't do a very good job. Both of those groups, or both of those people you just mentioned. I think the General Assembly was a little short-sighted. I think that it wasn't implemented in the best way. John mentioned the problem of Common Core, which people should have figured out and thought about. There's another complicating factor, which they also allowed students to use portfolios if they didn't take tests well. That's a very complicated subject. One way that was interpreted was people probably heard to take 30 some odd short tests over a period of time. We're in an era where people are already mad that kids have too many tests. So I think the thing to do is take a deep breath, figure out a way to come back, don't fail a third of the third graders in North Carolina because of what do you want to call it, a bureaucratic nightmare or poor planning, and figure out a way to teach kids to read.
I want to deal with the issue of, let's just assume that a third of the third graders cannot read at grade level. What does that say about our education system, Gene?
Well, you don't test kids in the first 3 grades anyway. You more or less on a portfolio.
That's not answering my question. My question is, assume a third of the third graders can't read at grade level. What does it say?
You do the same thing with them. It's remediation that you do with college students who graduate, and 8th graders today, of which there's 66%, can't read at grade level.
I think that was the intent that Senator Berger had at the outset, was let's identify these children and get them the help that they need.
All right, but we've tried this business of not promoting, stopping social promotion, John.
We did.
Does it look like we're getting back into that all over again?
The idea was never that you were going to test, retest, do a summer program, and a third of the students wouldn't pass. The assumption was that the additional work, particularly in the summer, would take a large number of those students above the standard, and that's probably what would have happened and what will happen.
Chris, I think the big question that most of the folks that are watching right now want to know is, can DPI, do we have confidence DPI can fix this?
Well, I think DPI can fix it. The state board is going to have to play a role, and the General Assembly is going to have to play a role. This problem you mentioned before, it wasn't just created by DPI. I think there was poor planning and poor legislation. They all have to come together and work together and figure out a way. I think we do agree third graders need to be able to read, but we also don't need to keep moving standards, adding federal tests that we didn't plan for. This has to be an organized, thoughtful way to do this, and I think we can do it.
All right. Remember, NC Spin is now being aired on Time Warner cable systems, except in the Raleigh-Durham area. To learn the time and channel listing, you can consult the ncspin.com website. You can also watch us anytime you want on Time Warner On Demand or on the ncspin.com website. We post each week's show on Friday, so view us anytime you want. And while there, be sure to sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle. Follow us on Twitter at NCSpin Tweets, on ncspin.com, or NCSpin on Facebook. We want to hear your spin. When we come back after these messages, IT problems with the state.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
The average consumer now is honest. They want to know just the facts. Well, really, they want to know if that animal primarily has had a life that is conducive to that animal enjoying its life. Our job is to produce a real good, solid calf. We keep them purebred out of purebred Charolais cattle, and we can keep them healthy. It's a low-stress environment, so that's my system. It's been a blessing.
The best part about being a member of a Touchstone Energy Cooperative is that it's your Touchstone Energy Cooperative. Learn more about the power of your co-op membership at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
With every week that passes, it seems we get another story of information technology problems in our state that don't work. The big fiasco with NC Tracks and NC Fast, perhaps the most glaring, but the Department of Revenue had to bail out on a new software program they'd already spent millions of dollars on because it didn't work. The Department of Motor Vehicle software doesn't track safety inspections, property taxes, and license plate renewals all the time. And the Department of Public Instructions had problems with software supposed to track student information. Gene, what is the problem here? Are government agencies just not doing a good job in specking out what they need? Are we not holding our private providers accountable, or what?
Yes.
All of the above.
All of the above. No, what has happened is that we started when Linnea Kanzler was at the Department of H&H, and in 1998 trying to parallel with a new system. But what has happened, particularly on the tracking, is that they were supposed to take 6 months to merge the two together. And they never did that. They simply cut it off. Add to that over 177 new regulations that were demanded by the Fed government on it, and try to put all that together, and they couldn't do it. On the DOT thing, the only thing that I could say that I see there is that you have brand new people trying to operate a system that they're not familiar
Well,
with.
it's a new software system.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, here's the bottom line, though. As a state, we have failed to make critical investment, and the Democrats share responsibility with this. Over the last 12 years, we failed to make critical investments in the IT infrastructure of our state. Big systems and small systems, desktop computers, then major systems that manage your money, that manage your operation systems, and all your key departments.
I got
and we've
that,
got
and
to address it.
I think you're right about that. But John, on the monies that we have spent, for instance, on NC Tracks, where we're hundreds of millions of dollars over budget, they don't work. Or we just...
I mean, I'm sympathetic to your argument, Brad, but I think it applies to areas, for example, the court system, where there really hasn't been enough investment.
Money, yeah.
But in other places like K-12 and HES, there's been huge investment. It just hasn't been managed effectively. You know, procuring information technology systems, that's difficult for the private sector. Companies often get into trouble doing it. I've had problems in my little organization sometimes getting things set up the way they were expected to go. The state clearly needs people who have more experience procuring these systems and holding contractors accountable. It's because right now what happens, unfortunately, is the contractors have a lot more knowledge and a lot more power than the people they're negotiating with or supposedly complying with, and that's part of the reason why we get into this mess.
Good point. When Governor McCrory took office, I mean, even before he was sworn in, he was talking about these problems that he had uncovered with IT. He hired a specialist to supervise IT implementation and purchasing in North Carolina. He's been a year on the job, Chris. Have we seen any evidence of that getting any better?
Well, we still have a lot of problems, and I think John is actually onto it. I don't think we have, and I hope that you're talking about Chris Estes. I hope he does a good job and helps figure these things out. But I do think that in many cases the contractors have much more knowledge. They're trying to sell something. They're trying to make money. Once they get the contract and things go wrong, the state is sort of stuck, because it's pretty bad to then to acknowledge, oh, we made a big mistake, we got the wrong contract, now we have to pay somebody else millions of dollars, go to court and try to get our money back. I think it's a huge problem. I do think the infrastructure in a lot of cases is a problem. It's not very sexy to go home and say, instead of I built a road or I hired more teachers, we invested a lot of money in the county in the insurance, in the technology system to do our social services contract.
I don't think the voters have any appetite at all for having a continuing dialogue of saying we have system failure after system failure. At some point in time, you got to fix the darn thing.
I personally think that a candidate might be able to make political hay out of the judicial system, arguing that if you don't have adequate tracking, we're going to lose control, lose your
the Chief Justice
parolees
of the
and
Supreme
your
Court should order the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem to her chambers and say, why aren't you funding us? That's leadership. That's getting something done, and we're not seeing it.
That's the judicial system getting in, governing instead of doing what they're supposed to do.
They have an equal branch in our system of government under our Constitution, and she has that authority.
That dog won't hunt.
Well, the big question, the $24 question here is, what are we going to do about all of this? I mean, what is it going to take to get better at this IT situation, Gene?
You just, to everyone's point, you're going to have to work it out. You're in the road now. You can't turn off.
As a taxpayer, that doesn't give me a heck of a lot of confidence.
No, and you shouldn't have any, but it's going to stay that way until they do it on their own. You're already too deep in.
Chris, what's your suggestion of what we need to do?
Well, I think it is leadership, and I think that, Governor McCrory has been in office now more than a year. If these problems continue for another, into his second year of the administration, then I think we have to hold him responsible. He said he was going to fix it, and he needs to fix it, and needs to tell us why he's not fixing it. He's right, the Democrats caused some of these problems, but not all of them. A lot of them have continued, as you pointed out. That's part of being the CEO in North Carolina. You're in charge of all of it.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm tired of finger pointing and blaming everybody, and I'm ready to see it work. John, what's it going to take to get it fixed?
I think putting someone passionate into the position, maybe Brad. I mean, he's got a real strong opinion about this. I know that the answer to your $24
he and the
question will cost more than $24.
Chief Justice are really close friends, right?
She's a fine lady. She's a fine lady, but they need leadership.
Is John talking about an Obama czar being put in place?
I'm anti-czar.
Our courts need the system fixed. They really do. Our clerks need it. The DAs need it. We got to put some money in our court system.
And the justice system needs to be able to talk to each other, because they can't do that. Well, anyway, when we come back after these messages, we're going to talk about what's going on with the Democratic Party in North Carolina.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
The sun will come out tomorrow. Bet your bottom dollar that tomorrow there'll be sun. Just thinking about tomorrow. Here's the way the cobwebs and sorrow. Till there's none. When I'm stuck in the day that's gray and lonely, I just stick out my chin and grin and say, oh, oh, ooh. Tomorrow, tomorrow, I love ya. Tomorrow, you're only a day away.
Your help is our hope. Please, give today.
You trust your family physician to care for you and your family. We treasure that trust and are committed to providing the best care possible for all North Carolinians. It's time for Medicaid reform, but not without input from North Carolina's family physicians. Medicaid reform will impact health care for all of us. Tell state leaders you want your physician involved. We need Medicaid reform that's good for North Carolina. To sign our petition of support, visit rnchealthcare.com.
With over 30 years of catering experience in the Triangle, why not bring the innovative style of the Irregardless Cafe and Catering to your next event? Our event specialists can assist with the planning of business meetings, cocktail parties, and sit-down meals for receptions and gatherings. We do it all. For your next event and special occasion, contact Irregardless Cafe and Catering.
We now return to NC Spin.
Last week we gave a broad overview of the 2014 election cycle. This week we want to talk a little bit more about the climate in which these elections will be held. And we can't avoid talking about the problems the North Carolina Democratic Party is experiencing. Last Sunday, the executive committee of the party met in Greensboro, hired a new executive director, and party chair Randy Voller reported fundraising leading up to this election cycle is so weak, he's going to have to possibly lay off people in party headquarters and maybe even close down the Goodwin House, which is the state party headquarters in Raleigh. Brad, you're a campaign consultant for political candidates. What's your assessment of what's going on in the state Democratic Party?
Tom, it's really sad. I'm fully convinced that the chairman is the Wile E. Coyote of North Carolina politics. He enjoys reaching into a political bag of tricks, pulling out a hand grenade, pulling the pin, and waiting for kaboom. I mean, that's the way the guy operates. So the candidates and the campaign managers and the consultants who are out having to work to try and win elections have to work around the party infrastructure to be able to accomplish that. And what you've got to realize, the fight here is probably 150 to 200 people on the state executive committee who have a piece of power within the Democratic Party.
And that executive committee is huge.
It is huge. And the fight is over them having control of the party, and they're more interested in arguing the plan of organization than building an organization to go out and win elections and govern.
Gene, it wasn't too many years ago the Democrats were the ones that were flush with cash, and the Republicans were the ones who were begging for money and needing organization. Things have done a 180 turn since that time. Why?
It's amazing that it has done that. One, the party in power gets the money anyway, but the Republicans got it, particularly in '94 and this last time, because of the dissatisfaction that the people had. But they actually got together, arm in arm, with Newt Gingrich's contract with America, and that's what's going to happen again with the Democrat Party.
Well, even statewide, though, they were still having problems, John, even in the '94, even though they were winning some elections. It took the state Republican Party hiring Tom Fetzer to bring in and get the ship righted, did it not?
Yes, state party leadership matters. It's not the most important thing in any election cycle, as Brad well knows. Candidate consultants, the donors, the organizations that occur outside the party have been important anyway. Now for Democrats, they're going to be all important. We already know there are going to be multiple independent expenditure groups, particularly in 2016, but maybe even in 2014, that will act as the North Carolina Democratic Party for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, Jim Hunt's starting one, Chris, and In 28, we saw Kay Hagan just completely circumvent the Democratic Party and run it out of the Guilford County Democratic Party headquarters instead of the state headquarters.
And you're seeing groups, interest groups, have candidate recruitment functions, which the parties used to do. I think the Democratic Party story is a big one in Raleigh, and people are embarrassed and think it's ridiculous, and it is ridiculous, and it makes people's jobs harder, people like Brad and candidates. But for the voters, I don't think they notice at all. They're still going to see campaign commercials they're just be funded by different places. Candidates will be recruited by different places. As long as the Democratic Party keeps fighting internally, it's less and less relevant. That's a shame, because I think we need two vibrant parties both doing their job.
That's an excellent point. Brad, have we reached a day where political parties are basically irrelevant, out of fashion, no need for them?
We're fast to reaching that point. Simply, as John noted, it's all because of independent expenditures, and the roles that they're playing have been traditional roles that the parties have played in the past. Chris is absolutely right. You've got organizations doing recruitment, candidate training, messaging, actually doing ground game and air wars. Yeah. I mean, they're running the TV commercials and direct mailers.
Gene, so far as it goes, how's this going to affect the candidates who are running? Chris mentioned, but I'm thinking specifically about Kay Hagan, who's running again for re-election. How is all of the disarray in the Democratic Party going to affect her chances of re-election?
Well, I think it's going to have a tremendous negative effect. She's already announced she's going to use the Wake County Democrat Party as her base this time. All those
again circumventing the main party.
Yes, all of the things that were popped up negative of what the General Assembly did when they were in session, in the long session, are negated now by this lack of support and the infighting of the Democrat Party.
Well, Brad, you take political polls as part of your business. I mean, what are the people feeling out there? What's the general tenor? Are they upset? I mean, the polls show they're upset with the Republicans.
As far as the party apparatus, they're not upset. But I will say this. I've been doing this for 22 years, getting paid for it. I've never seen a political environment about which we're going to enter into the campaign cycle where the voters feel so disengaged, so disenfranchised, so upset they don't see politics as being relevant, and they don't think government's very competent.
Is that Republicans, Democrats,
Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and it's going to impact turnout. In the primary, 20 to 25%. It will have a lower threshold turnout between 38 and 42% in the general election.
We saw a new PPP poll come out this week in which it essentially said we've been thinking Tom Tillis was sort of the front runner, but this new PPP poll shows all 8 of these candidates, or at least 3 or 4 of them, are running pretty much neck and neck. There is no favorite in here.
Well, the polls show that because most Republican primary voters are very engaged in this race, but it's all about Kay Hagan. They don't really care.
Tillis is the only one that's done any advertising.
They don't really care much about who the Republican is. They just want to beat Kay Hagan. My guess is that when Tillis starts spending a lot more money and on the air, and the other candidates aren't on the air, that Tillis' numbers surge.
The best thing that can happen for the Democrats is the Tom Tillis not win his party nomination, and that will create a windfall for the Democrats going into November.
He's already spent a lot of money on television and name recognition going all over the state, and he still doesn't have a lead. What does that say?
Well, I think that it's very competitive. He's got issues on his right that he's having to deal with on that flank side, but I think if the Republicans want to beat Kay Hagan, Tillis is the candidate who can beat her. If they nominate somebody else, it becomes a fringe race, and Hagan becomes elevated.
Remember, this will be over $20 million spent on this campaign, and they've only spent pennies so far.
Well, it's been about $9 million.
That's independent expenditures, and that's mostly against Hagan, not for Tillis. That's the point.
Well, and it has had an effect
on Hagan, but it does not going to elevate any particular Republican.
All right, after these messages, we're going to ask the panelists to tell us something we don't know. Stay with us.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
NCAnimalAg.com.
I believe no one who asks for help
should be turned away.
I believe it's good to question.
None of us are qualified to judge the lives of others.
I believe a church isn't a building.
When you truly embrace diversity, you embrace God.
I can't believe there's a church that believes these things.
We may not all believe exactly the same thing, but the people of the United Methodist churches in your community believe in God and each other. If you're searching for something to believe in, our hearts, our minds, and our doors are always open.
Return to NC Spin.
Now we come to the part of the show everybody talks to me about when they see me on the street, the part where we ask the panelists to tell us something we don't know. They choose the topic and sound off on it for about 20 seconds. Gene Arnold, we'll start with you.
The time the governor's office has been since the General Assembly went home, has been working overtime in trying to build a relationship with members of the General Assembly, particularly the Senate. They made a little headway, but not much on the Senate side.
All right, Chris, tell us something we don't know.
The new private nonprofit that will be running the state's economic development efforts, headed by a man named Richard Lindenmuth, and has a board that was appointed by Governor McCrory. Interestingly, that board and Mr. Lindenmuth, neither one are subject to the State Ethics Act. They were not required to fill financial disclosures out. We don't know anything about their personal financial interest, and they're going to be advising where to give away millions of dollars. The North Carolina Board of Electrolysis Examiners has to fill out ethics form.
John, tell us something we don't know.
As well they should. They're dangerous.
All right.
We just were talking about test scores earlier and the accountability system. Been a lot of criticism of the No Child Left Behind type of system, but a new study that was just published by University of North Carolina researchers, it's nationally known, but it's about North Carolina school districts, shows that form of accountability really has reduced the black-white test score gap in North Carolina school districts significantly.
Brad, tell us something we don't know.
2014 elections come down to independents. When you look at the PPP poll, the American Insight poll, both the top lines and the crosstabs for PPP show that independents are going to be the key for either party to govern. They're going to decide who's going to win the Senate.
Well, where are they leaning?
They're leaning right now double-digit leaning to the Republicans.
You've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, read our weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or NCSpin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.